having been through perimenopause and menopause, and having a lot of autonomy in my role at the time meant that I could manage my symptoms myself. But there are a lot of women going through menopause who don't have that, you might call, luxury, and I think it's really important that they have as positive an experience as they can. So as an example, my best friend is a sister in the second busiest accident and emergency in the UK and was perimenopausal during COVID, and her experience was, as you can imagine, entirely different to mine, and I think it's important that we recognise the challenges that all women face, regardless of role, sector that they work in, etc. And there are 4 million women aged between 45 and 55 currently in the workplace. Over 50s are the fastest growing demographic in the workforce. So this isn't a topic that is going to be going away anytime soon. And I think it's important that we retain as many women in the workplace, both for their personal perspective, and they are as economically productive for themselves as they can be, and for their future pension pot, etc.
How far do you think companies have come over the last 10 or 20 years in terms of recognising menopause and its impact on women in the workplace?
I think over 10 and 20 years, a phenomenal journey, because even I had a hysterectomy in 2015, and I was off work for the classic 6 weeks, and nobody talked about why I was, and it was because of my perimenopause that I had a hysterectomy. Nobody talked about it at all. I came back to work and everybody was just like, "You okay?" I was like, "Yes, thank you," and we just got on with it. And even when I was even more recently, I've worked in organisations where it's just not been discussed, and with offline we talked about men as allies, and I do quite a lot of men only sessions, like in conversation with, or safe space conversations. And when I started doing them, I did one internally in the Adecco group when we launched our policy, and there were 2 men came on the call, and one of them had actually dialed into the wrong call but was too embarrassed to dial off. But more recently, I've done them internally and had, you know, a large proportion of our male workforce on them. I've done them externally for DWP and had hundreds of men dialing into them, and actually gone out into organisations commercially and kicked off their menopause conversation, because they didn't have anybody internal who you know, wanted to do that or felt that they could do that. So there's definitely been a huge step change, so I would say, in the last 3 years. And I really hope, you know, my mum's generation didn't have conversations like this, but I actually hope that my daughter's generation doesn't either, because it's just part and parcel of the, you know, of being a woman in the workplace. So it's almost so normalized that there's no need to talk about it almost. So absolutely still work to do, but I think we've come a long way in a very short period of time.
Thank you. Congratulations on your role as Menopause Employment Champion for England. Long overdue. Could you tell us what your priorities for tackling these issues might be?
In terms of how I'm going to tackle the topic, I'm going to look at best practice across organisations in 5 key sectors. So with the aid of the sector bodies that is relevant to that sector, we will do a series of workshops, roundtable events, etc., to pull that best practice together and look at employers that are doing some really good work in that area, but then ensure that that is shared across the sector. And the reason I'm doing it sector specific is because, as we said earlier, the experiences in one sector can be entirely different to the experiences in another sector. So I think that's really important. And within, large organisations, there can be multiple sectors within one organisation. So again, important to recognise that. So we'll start off with a cross-sector roundtable, just talking about menopause best practice in the workplace, and then break it down into the 5 key sectors that government have selected. And those sectors are retail, hospitality, adult care, manufacturing, and professional and technical. And from those workshops, we will pull roundtable evidence of employer best practice onto a portal so that it's accessible to all organisations, regardless of size, etc. So it's important that we recognise that not everybody works for a large organisation, and the experience of somebody who works in a very small organisation should be equitable, regardless of how big their HR budget is or EDI budget, etc. So we'll start off with that, and it's about best practice. The second aspect of the strategy is around an allyship programme. So allyship and having somebody to talk to is really critical. So I've spoken to a lot of women who have felt isolated because it could be because that they live alone, or culturally they don't feel that they can talk about it, or it's just not part of their particular culture, or it could be that they work in an organisation with limited touch points and allyship. So to put them in touch with somebody in a different organisation but in the same sector who can be their ally throughout menopause. The third aspect of it is I think really critical, and that is about pledge and looking at employers who will sign a pledge to say that they are menopause friendly. And the reason I think that is important is because there are 3 million women claiming universal credit currently, approximately 3 million claiming universal credit. The average age of the claimant is increasing. It's now 38. So that is just coming up to that sort of average perimenopausal age. And obviously there will be women who are experiencing perimenopause younger than that. But being out of work for any period of time is challenging, and I think it's important that if we are trying to get women back into the workplace who could have become perimenopausal or menopausal while they're out of the workplace, we need to find menopause friendly employers that they can then go and work for. So that'll be the third aspect of it. And obviously the final part of it is a comms plan, so that we can get the communication out there that this exists for employers and their workforces to work with to make the experience better.
How vital are initiatives like Wellbeing of Women's Menopause Workplace Pledge in driving change, really positive change, for menopausal and perimenopausal women in the workplace?
I think you absolutely cannot underestimate the impact of the work that that organisations like Wellbeing of Women do, and the impact it has on people in the workplace. They need to be able to find out what is going to work for them. It could be around policy, it could be about best practice, it could be about education, how to start the conversation with a colleague or a line manager, or even how you start the conversation outside of work. But the work that they do just really underpins how an organisation can change their culture and make it a better place to work from a women's health perspective.
I'm really interested to know what you've been doing in your role at Adecco in terms of menopause initiatives for everybody. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Of course, it goes back to World Menopause Day 2021 when we launched our menopause policy. And absolutely, incredibly naively, in hindsight, I thought, amazing, we've got a policy. At that time, we were only one of 10% of organisations who had a menopause policy. But actually, all that policy did was really kick off the conversation, and the kicking off of the conversation, and we launched it with a podcast. So myself and some senior leaders in the organisation talked about our menopause experience, and we were really honest about our symptoms and the impact that they had on daily life and how we felt in the workplace. One of my colleagues, it was more about the practical symptoms of, the hot flushes, heavy periods, etc. Another, it was about the more psychological symptoms, how she felt that she couldn't carry on in her role because she'd lost her confidence, she wasn't sleeping, low self-esteem, etc. And so a really broad overview, and we were really honest. And what that allowed other people to do in the organisation was think, actually, if they can talk about it so openly, so can I. So it was almost the podcast, the policy, those two things happening simultaneously, with a real catalyst for change. We did an inclusion brunch where we invite everybody in the organisation to dial in, different topic every week. That week when we launched menopause, it obviously started off the conversation. So after that, we did line manager training. We created toolkits for line managers, toolkits for colleagues, an allyship program. We've got a hot topics network, which is obviously like a menopause cafe but virtual, that anybody can drop into. And then we created a separate program which is called the Adecco Group Talks, and that's about lots of different challenges that people in the organisation may face. And we have people who are happy to have one-to-one supporting conversations in private with a colleague. So if you are struggling with a particular topic, let's say menopause, you can fill in a smart sheet, and it goes to the person that is responsible for having those conversations. And that model, so the podcasts, the policy or guiding principles if appropriate, the inclusion brunch to launch it, the spin-off network, the allyship program, the training, etc. We've used that for a multitude of topics after menopause, and what that's done is allowed us to use that formula, so it's really embedded those topics. So we've done period management in the workplace, so we called that Bloody Hell, we're talking about periods. Had we not launched menopause 12 months before, there's no way we could have launched a topic like that into the business. We've talked about pregnancy loss, domestic abuse, men's mental health, and we've always kicked it off in that way. And when we do our inclusion brunches, it's a combination of education and lived experience. So getting people in the organisation to talk about their lived experience has really fundamentally changed the culture of the organisation. And I know that's really easy to say, but we are entirely data led. So our peak on data, which we take twice a year from our colleagues, has shown incrementally how our EDI, health and wellbeing, and feeling and belonging in the organisation has increased over the last 2 years.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you for sharing all of that. Finally, in your role as the Menopause Employment Champion for England, will you be working and collaborating with England's Women's Health Ambassador, Professor Dame Leslie Regan, who's also the Chair of Wellbeing of Women too, to help ensure that the government's plans for menopause, as laid out in the strategy, are really realised?
Absolutely. And I think, it would be foolish to go off at a different tangent, utterly disrespectful to the amazing work that Dame Leslie does. And I think there's so much synergy there that we absolutely can take this opportunity to really galvanise that work. Both, Dame Leslie and I have day jobs. I would say hers is rather more illustrious than mine, but nonetheless, we've both got a day job to do. So working together makes total sense, because we can amplify the work that we're doing and reach more people by doing that.
Helen, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And we wish you the best of luck in your role as Menopause Employment Champion for England. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.